Welcome to the Leading Movement Health Series. I'm your host, Phil Wagner, founder and CEO of Sparta Science. Falls in the elderly, they're increasing by about 2% every year. So when it comes to innovating and solving problems, a lot of times it's not about invention, it's about adoption. And leadership holds the key to this better adoption. And today's guest, I'm super excited, John Cochrane. He's the CEO of one of the largest senior living providers in the U.S., super passionate and on the cutting edge of an industry that isn't always innovative. And why this episode is different is, this population of 65-year-olds and older is growing so fast. And movement is both a prescriptive opportunity to improve health, but also it can be a cause of falls, which is one of the major inflection points in people's lives. So I want to welcome John to the show.
Phil, it's great to be with you. And everything you just said, I could probably talk about for an hour, starting with the aging demographic, right? And I think that's important that we understand that we've got this aging demographic that is occurring not just in our country, but it's occurring globally, and it's going to grow for the next 30 years. And for the first time in history, we're going to have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 15. And we tend to let statistics like that fly by our heads and say, oh, that's kind of remotely interesting. Well, no, it's profoundly interesting, and it's going to shake our world in ways we're only beginning to understand. And it's why things like preserving movement flexibility is so utterly critical to maintaining population health. And we're just at this interesting time of understanding what's possible in the area of movement. And as you and I were talking before we started recording, it's so interesting, these what we refer to as the inevitable biomarkers of aging, these assumed biomarkers of loss of bone strength, loss of physical strength, loss of balance, loss of flexibility, declining movement. We think of them as inevitable, but in fact, they're not inevitable at all. They're preventable. And better than that, they're almost all reversible and relatively easily reversible. And so I love this idea of moving without pain or fear. That is so critical to this aging population. We see it, we hear it every day from the people we serve at Humangood. And you also mentioned the price that we pay for falls occurring among the elderly, which again, we accept as an inevitable part of aging, and it's not inevitable at all. But what it is, from my business standpoint, it's our number one source of insured loss as a company. And that is true for everyone who operates in our space. So we have an enormous business need to solve this problem, to address this problem. It is seniors' number one fear as they age. This idea of moving with pain and fear, and I can talk about that personally, is seniors' biggest fear, because everybody knows if you're 80, 85, 90, 95, and you take a spill, nothing good happens from that. So how do you avoid that is obviously job number one for people as they age. And of course, it's also families' number one concern for their aging relatives. And so there's this cloud of fear that hangs over mobility, if you will, and loss of mobility, with, at the current time, very little idea of how to reverse that, how to address it in some meaningful, sustainable, measurable way. And I think the work that you're doing with Sparta Science is exactly aligned with what people are looking for, which is, how do I understand where I am today? How do I get an assessment that's accurate about what my strength, stability, and balance is today? How do I apply reasonable interventions to that assessment? How do I know what's possible for me? And then how do I actually measure my improvement over time? So I'm getting a feedback loop that tells me, hey, I assessed over here. If I get into a silver sneakers class and reassess myself every week, I've gotten 50% better. I've gotten into a strength balance class and my balance score has increased by 82%. That, I think, is increasingly what people are looking for as we age successfully. And I think there's an awareness, and we were talking about this as well, of what we've always known anecdotally, that movement is an important measurement of overall life satisfaction and aging health, now has clinical and scientific validation to it. That if you're not going to focus on anything else, focus on your mobility. and sustaining that mobility and improving that mobility with some easy interventions. And you can have a dramatic impact in quality of life and ultimately in reduced healthcare costs for society, which is also going to be critically important. And then for companies like mine, it's critically important because it lowers our overall risk from unnecessary falls. So I think this is such an exciting time to be focusing and talking about this space. We're sitting on the cusp of this population explosion. And we're sitting on this kind of explosion of data and opportunity and awareness that what we've always assumed about aging doesn't have to be this way at all.
I think one of the interesting things is you're talking, two things is we just were talking with a professional sports coach, and he talked about how he has to balance the business decisions with the quality of life for the athletes, right? And it's no different in your environment as you talk, right? There's the insurance piece, but there's also a quality of life for your customers, just like there's for the athletes.
I think what's so interesting about that is how utterly aligned those things are.
Yeah, they're not in opposition.
Not in opposition at all. And I think that's what, again, makes this such an exciting time to be pursuing this field, because my interests are exactly aligned with my clients' interests, exactly aligned with society's interests, exactly aligned with families' interests. And so this is the golden moment to turn the corner and improve mobility for everyone.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the challenges sometimes in healthcare, right? Is there isn't that alignment, with the different stakeholders and parties, and it makes sources of friction and certainly stifles innovation. I think one of the things we were talking about, I'd love to kind of hear more, is with innovation, right? Sometimes it's easy for organizations to be playing around with it. One of the things that really drew me to you is you're always talking about outcomes and how do we work back from delivering results, because we just don't want to make innovation a hobby, right?
Well, and that description is I think, and maybe it's not just our field, but it's one of my criticisms is we do play around with innovation far too often. I mean, it's fun, it's novel, it's exciting, but ultimately we're just playing around. We're wasting time, wasting resources, and we're not actually achieving something that any customer desires, right? There's no business outcome, there's no customer outcome, there's no societal outcome. And so at Humangood, we talk about innovation for impact.
Love it.
And that is critical for us, that we tie an outcome to our innovation activities, that we don't solve every problem we're looking to address, that's for sure. But that's part of innovation, is a willingness to say, hey, we're trying to solve a problem. This worked, this didn't work, this might work a little bit, this works for something else. But when all is said and done, we've got to show we're moving the needle on something that matters to someone, and doing it on a sustained, desired basis. And again, that's where I think something like movement is so important, because part of that is when you talk about innovation, in an organization like ours with the size and breadth we are, it's easy to scatter your resources and start innovating in all kinds of areas that ultimately, even if there's impact, it's impact that doesn't make a difference. And so it's the idea of focusing on what matters most and having a lasting impact. And movement goes to the top of that list for all the reasons we just discussed.
Yeah. And I don't think a lot of times the word sustainable is not usually used with innovation, right? And that's critical though, right? I mean, if you are going to innovate, what's the expectation if you want it to have an outcome, is it needs to be sustainable, because a lot of the health issues you're talking about, they actually, build up over time, and they're not going to be an acute issue. How do you start choosing with innovation? Like where do you put those resources and making sure that it's guarded enough that you're developing innovations and not getting into that, play area type?
I think you do that in a few ways. I think you do it in conversations with your customers, and that means all of your customers, right? So in our case, it's our direct customers, are the aging consumer, if you will, who's pursuing healthful longevity, but it's also the customers of our team members, our business partners, our insurers, Medicare, Medicaid, all of the people who circle the aging field. So part of it is soliciting feedback. A big part of it is our own observation of understanding and understanding successful aging and understanding the drivers of that. And then it's conversation around what are the biggest determinants of healthy aging? Where are the biggest needs and opportunities and gaps? And which of those gaps and needs can we actually make a measurable impact with? What are the things we can change the quickest with the biggest desired outcome attached to them? And that's where we try to make sure that, again, we're focused on 2 or 3 things that matter most to our customers where we can have a sustained impact.
Yeah. It's that focus is so critical. I think one of the things that surprised me the most coming into the long-term care space is how predictive fear of falling is for an actual fall, right? Yep. There's this self-fulfilling prophecy that, if you actually fear of falling, you either have less mobility because you're fearful, or you shorten your gait, right? Because you don't want to fall, and you end up like actually having that happen because of it.
Well, so now you're describing my late father-in-law, who, as he began having problems with mobility, right? He started having some decline in vision. What did he do? He did what so many people do. He started walking by looking down at his feet. Worst thing you can do. Taking shorter steps, bad. Walking less, bad. But he didn't know what else to do, nor did he have a vehicle to get him to a better place. Yep. So absent some alternative, he did the only thing he knew to do, which was do less and ultimately fall more. It didn't have to be that way, right? I mean, it's a question, but what you've got to do is what you do at Sparta Science, which is give people a tool to assess where they are today. What is the weakness? What is the area we need to focus on? And it's different for every person. So we may assess 5 people, and one may need to go to a silver sneakers class. One may need to go to a strength class. One may need to go to a yoga class. One may need to go to a balance clinic. One may need some rehab. You've got to know for the individual where they are, what the prescribed intervention is. And most of these interventions are actually easy and accessible to people. And then the critical piece is, and this is the piece I think we miss so often, we miss a feedback loop, a rapid feedback loop that gives people a sense of progress towards a determined goal. Otherwise, we don't, why do people not do physical therapy? Well, is it because they don't want to get better? Absolutely not. They don't do it because they don't get feedback. Are they doing it right? Are they making progress? And if we can give them an assessment with a personalized intervention and a rapid feedback loop, we can absolutely change the course of people like my father-in-law and so many others who, as you say, we live in fear of falling. We have some pain with mobility, and we do all the wrong things because we don't know what else to do. Well, now we do know what else to do, and bringing that to people is where the opportunity and the need is. Yeah,
and I think I couldn't agree more. And this is where the resourcing and the focus is really important to gain that sort of adoption. I think the other thing that was interesting when we first met and got to know each other is, as we look to the future of Humangood, your organization, not many organizations in the long-term care space are bringing in CTOs out of, tech companies in Silicon Valley. I mean, you're walking the walk. It's like, hey, we're really going to innovate, and I'm bringing in a CTO from a tech company to help us do that. So talk a little bit about kind of the future, as we get towards the end here of Humangood and your organization.
Well, I hope you mean the end of our time together, not the end of Humangood. But
no, the end of our time. I know you got a lot on the plate. Yeah, so I want to.
That aside, this is where I'll give credit to our board for being fully behind a vision to bring real innovation to our company and to our field and to our customers. They see that, as do we, as an essential part of the mission of this organization, to move this work forward, again, in a lasting, impactful way for the people we're serving today and the people we need to be serving today and tomorrow. And so they've backed this effort to help us explore where the needs, where the opportunities, where the gaps that we can step in and fill, and most importantly, what are the resources we need to bring to the table to get from where we are to where we want to be as an organization. How do we make sure that we as an organization are doing the work that we need to be doing? And that means bringing in a CTO with a very different skill set than in a traditional organization, someone who understands working with innovative organizations and companies can help us sort through all the noise in that field and drill down to the companies that can have the most impact for us, to setting up the internal structure for innovation that will allow us to successfully pilot programs, some of which will work, some of which will not work, some of which will get repurposed into some other area, but to do that on a rapid basis and to commit the dollars and resources for years going forward, understanding that a commitment to innovation is not a one-year commitment. You can't assess your success or failure after 1 year. You've got to be kind of all in and all in on a sustained basis. And so as we look at the future of human good, whether it's setting up our Office of Innovation in our new Innovation Center, whether it's investing in early stage companies, which as far as I know, we're the only organization that does that in our space, or it's committing to sustained dollars for innovation as just a standard part of our budgeting process. Our board and our leadership are behind that, understanding that that is the future for our company, and it is absolutely the need in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of times when I'll talk to folks, not usually leaders, but just in general, and you ask about innovation, it's, they're talking about some flashy technology. You're talking about sustainable budgets, right? Which is the right way to do it, right? Because innovation is iterative. Technology is always changing, right? And has to be adapted to the organization. And when we started before the show, we were talking about how there's, leadership biohacking, if you will, or leadership hacks is kind of the goal. And so I usually wrap up with kind of 3 takeaways, that hopefully other leaders can learn from. And the biggest takeaway for me first from you is like, you have to challenge these assumptions that your industry may have already made, right? That, hey, falls just happen as you age, right? No, I don't accept that, right? The second big one is how important innovation is around outcomes. They have to be, to use your words, innovation for impact. How do we define what those outcomes are and then work backwards to create alignment? And then the last piece, which you mentioned towards the end, is, you need to have that feedback loop to wrap all that back around. What outcomes are we working towards, and how is that challenging that assumption? And I think that those 3 pieces are, I think, some great takeaways, I know for me personally, and I hope for everybody listening. So I want to thank you for joining us, John. I know your schedule's fairly tight, and appreciate the time you were giving us today.
Bill, I appreciate your time as well. Enjoyed the conversation and happy to talk about mobility anytime you want.
Thanks, John.